So next, I would love to introduce Tommy Stinson. Tommy Stinson's the managing director of Qualitative Insights at Maru Matchbox, and this is that I've been really looking forward to this conversation because at my company, I've been getting questions from my clients about, listen, I'm trying to convert from traditional qual to online qual. You know, what are the pros? What are the cons? How should I be thinking about it? So before we even jump into this, Tommy, I'd love to just ask you a little bit about like kind of what is your feeling and what are some things we should be taking into consideration in making this determination? Should I do virtual qual today? Should I hold off? What are the pros? What are the cons?
Yeah, thanks, Will. Hey, hi everybody. Nice to virtually meet you all. Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that we've been giving a lot of thought to. And I mean, I think it's safe to say that digital qual, online qual is definitely not for everything. I think it would be disingenuous to say it's the panacea. But I think there are a couple of interesting things to consider. The first, I guess, that comes to mind for me is the ability to do different types of projective techniques that really help us get at the emotional connections that people have with the category or with the brand or with the topic. The ability to use the online channel to find different types of stimulus, looking for different types of photos or imagery for image collaging or things like that, even using video as a way to help understand better what people are feeling. That's definitely something that we can do probably much better online, and it's a great time to do that. Practically, digital qual is just perfect for casting a really broad geographic net, right? And,
Yeah.
and being, I mean, the ubiquity of the internet, while it's certainly not, I think we're all seeing working from home, perhaps in many cases, not where it should be or where we would hope it to be. It is widespread enough that we can really cast a broad net and get really good representation geographically. I think it's not great for obviously places where context is most important. So, places where you would want the tactile experience of engaging with a product, or if you want to see bigger context that somebody, a consumer or a participant might be operating in, that's obviously not ideal digitally. And then I think, depending on the type of trick you can do, as I think we've probably all seen in the various Zoom calls that we're a part of, having a really fluid, dynamic group conversation can be a challenge with digital. There are ways to get around that through expectation setting and adding perhaps a little bit of extra time for people to get used to talking over each other and starting and stopping. And no, you go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. But so I think there are just considerations there that you should be taking into account.
Awesome.
That answers your question, and I don't know.
No, it did. No, it did. And if it didn't, then I'm sure the people on the call will send some questions to us in the chat box.
Happy to talk.
I know we're going to talk about grocery landscape and thinking about what's happening in grocery. Just kind of give us a sense of what we're going to be talking about today, and then I'm going to leave it to you, and you can take it from there.
Sure. Well, I tell you what. Why don't I go to the next slide here? So what I'd like to do is just talk very briefly, like super briefly, about who we are as a company, and that's primarily to provide some context for the research that I'll be sharing. But after we've done that, I plan to move into a discussion of the changing cultural context of grocery shopping, and that is the grounding for presenting the results of some work, the qualitative work that we did to understand how consumers in the US and in the UK are adapting their grocery shopping behaviors in light of COVID-19 and the various social distancing measures that we've seen. And then I'll wrap up with a couple of recommendations and some key considerations, I think, for brands and for marketers in how to navigate this. So very briefly, Maru Matchbox is an insights consultancy, and we're situated at the intersections of behavior and emotion. And by that, I mean that everything that we do, qualitative, quantitative, advisory services, secondary research, is designed with an understanding that if we're just looking at behavior, or if we're just asking people what they think about something, we're really missing the boat. And we have to take into consideration and find innovative ways to take into consideration the emotional connections that we all know as behavioral scientists, the emotional connections that drive consumer behavior. And we talk about this as minimizing the gap between what people do and what they say that they do. So we're better able to understand those things. We also know that consumers don't operate in a vacuum. And so our qualitative team especially is really well suited to understand the cultural trends that provide some context, I think, for how people feel and behave, how they think, and their attitudes. So we look at dominant or sort of mainstream cultural themes that are affecting category behavior, but also emerging themes and how culture is changing as the people interact, and the emotional connections that they have. So let me just, before I go to the next slide, I want to just talk very quickly about the work that we did. So we spent the last 2 weeks interviewing the primary grocery shopper for heads of household across the US and in the UK. And the goal there was to really understand, as I said, how people are navigating the grocery category in light of our current. And these were obviously not in-person interviews, these were telephone interviews. And as with all of our research designs, we incorporated a lot of creative techniques and image sorting exercises and things like that to help better understand what those emotional connections might be. So what I'm going to be sharing is the results of that work, but you'll see also some imagery that the respondents submitted as particularly evocative of how they felt about grocery shopping before the COVID-19 outbreak and how they're feeling about shopping now. So that helps us to really better understand what's going on. So let me dive into the cultural context here first, and we do this again to provide a bit of an explanatory framework for what we see. And with categories like grocery, sociological models like Maslow's hierarchy are really helpful. And based on work that we've done in the past, we have a pretty good idea of how the grocery category ladders from its physiological needs at the base to self-actualization. At the bottom, obviously, it's a place for food. It's meeting basic sustenance and basic physical requirements. But as we move up the pyramid, we see that there's safety considerations. We're buying fresh food. We're buying food that's going to make us healthy. The physical environment is safe. There's a sense of community. We have talked to people who shop with their kids or shop with their partners, who in some instances, depending on where you are geographically, even are seeing the grocery store as a place to engage with seeing friends in the aisles or things like that. There's a sense of accomplishment that comes from just feeling like I've made good choices when I shop, whether that's true or not. There's often that consideration. And then the highest level, self-actualization of I'm a good parent or provider, or I'm a creative chef, I'm a smart shopper or a thrifty shopper. So this is what we know, and it's been validated in this research about the ways that people have historically felt about the category. And this is what we see in the interviews that we've done and what we've seen with secondary research. And you'll notice here that the bottom, the physiological needs are still there. The self-actualization is largely unchanged, but the middle of this pyramid is dramatically disrupted. There are foundational concerns that we heard about safety, which all of this I think should make sense. The environment's unsafe. For many people, they feel like it's a risk to my health, my well-being, my family, just to physically be in a store. There are the community aspect of what people feel in the grocery store is disrupted. We're all wearing masks. You can't see people's facial expressions, and we know emotionally that reading body language and reading facial expressions is a key cue for how we connect with people and how we feel about our environment. There's also a sense of just distrust. People next to me or in line ahead of me may be sick, and I need to stay away from them. The sense of who I am and my status and esteem and identity is also at risk here. Just as I'm not trusting the person in front of me, they're not trusting me. They think I may be sick. And some of the emotional basis of feeling good about myself is missing. And then what's interesting, I think, in the highest level, and really the self-actualization aspect of this, is that it's no longer, grocery shopping is no longer just about what I do with my groceries. It's also now a part of who am I within the community. Am I a responsible citizen? Am I being a good neighbor? Am I following the rules, or am I putting other people at risk, or my family at risk? So this is again just sort of the cultural nuances here, and I think some of the shifts that we're seeing in how grocery shopping is perceived and approached from a consumer perspective. When we looked at the images that people presented and we talked through those and we interrogated those, there were some interesting differences, and I think they're illustrative. On the left side, the people, a subset of people that we met really just don't feel like they're at risk at all. They're following social distancing guidelines. They're doing all the things that they're supposed to be doing, but if we look beneath the surface, that's really more about following the rules. It's really more about social pressure than it is about a personal risk to them. And you see some of the quotes here. One woman said that her husband insists that she take a mask when she shops, but she doesn't wear it. I mostly keep my distance in stores to be polite, but I still try to smile and make eye contact and things like that. And when we look at these images from people that felt this way, you see here the images are full of white space, and they're spacious. If there are people in them, there are very few people. This is a chef. This person really felt like he was doing a much better job of cooking now and shopping for good healthy foods. This is primarily, I'm not at risk. It's everybody else who's dangerous, and I'll be careful of them, but I'm not fundamentally fearful for myself. On the other end of the spectrum, we talked to quite a few people who are very much afraid. And to be fair, some of them should be. We did speak to high-risk people, but others just have limited social setting or social networks, or single parents whereby if I get sick, I need to worry about who will care for my child. And for those people, they are being very, very careful. They are shopping strategically. It is like a well-planned operation to get in and out of the store as quickly as possible. And we see this in the images. One woman presented the image of on the left here from Hunger Games, and she was partially kidding, but she said it really does kind of feel like I'm sort of Katniss out there. I have to go out into the dangerous world to take care of my family, and I don't know what's going to happen. So this is, again, some of the ways that we start to understand what are the feelings that are driving behavior, what are the emotional, what's the emotional landscape that people are bringing with them, right, to the stores when they shop and to the interaction with the brands that they have. And with that understanding, we can then sort of complete the model. So the people on the left-hand side here, when we look at the feelings, people who aren't at risk are actually enjoying shopping in a new way right now. They feel like they're not at risk. They're loving the fact that the stores aren't as crowded as they might have been in the past. They're feeling some freedom to discover new ingredients and new recipes and browse a little bit more. But it's not all great. They're definitely worried about increased shopping costs. Almost everyone I spoke to has significantly higher household grocery bills. But generally, for them, it's a positive experience. When you talk to those who feel like they are at risk, they are really petrified, and they're really doing everything that they can, not just to do the bare minimum of what's been asked by the authorities, but they're actually also going above and beyond in terms of their safety. I think what's fascinating here for me is that despite these very different emotional states, we see very similar behaviors. And I think this is what's so interesting is from a brand perspective, from a research perspective, if we were just looking at the behaviors and just understanding how people were approaching the category, we would be missing an entire half of the puzzle, right? We would have a very surface understanding of what we're doing. So on the behavior side, we see everyone is minimizing trips. And if you move over sort of line by line, they're saying, well, I shouldn't get out more than necessary. I need to stay at home as much as I can. They're avoiding multi-store trips, and that's generally about, well, it's actually a couple of things. It's the line being too long, and it's difficult to get out and navigate the stores. But they're also, I think, that's causing them to consolidate their trips into one frequently large retailer, so like a larger supermarket where they can get everything in one stop, and they're minimizing their top-up trips. They're buying new things, so everyone, again, regardless of how they're feeling about the category, they are buying more, and they're branching out into new categories, and that's a couple of things. That's making more meals at home. People may not be eating lunch at the office, for example. People may be cooking more, but there's also a sense that I need to stretch my trips out. So I need to have a few extra things on hand in case. So I don't want to run too tight of a margin on my shopping. We had a question from a client about promotions and deals, and we're finding that people, while they are very much cost conscious and they're looking very carefully at prices where they can, where they have time, and where they feel safe to do that, they're largely ignoring promotions and deals, and that's really about keeping moving. And in some places, I know in many places in the UK, they actually can't dawdle. Like the flow of traffic is well ordered, and it's really highly structured. And everyone is looking for online options. I think to the presentation we just saw, it's online is huge. Most people are not able to do it. If they weren't doing it before, it's very hard to get into online, or even for those with the wherewithal to do it, meal kits or home delivery. They can't get a slot. They can't get in. Those companies are obviously seeing massive growth. So this is when we talk about that changing landscape. This is that landscape. And I think it points to a couple of areas for exploration, and I offer these to marketers and to brands more as thought starters and kind of guardrails and guidelines for how you can respond. And these areas of focus really align with the key pieces of Maslow's pyramid that are disrupted. So starting on the left, brands have to recognize, obviously, that fears are there, and the degree that marketers can respond by reassuring shoppers and fomenting a sense of safety and well-being, they will be well served to do so. And just from an example, ingredient stories right now matter more probably than they have in the past. Sustainability stories, sourcing, all of these things that reinforce that the product itself is safe will help to move that needle to making the environment feel safer, to making consumers more emotionally connected to the brand. From a sense of belonging, we see, obviously, I mean, shoppers are afraid, and there is a sense of communal concern and what that means for our society. And I think in this case, brands have to establish relevance. They have to provide ways for people to feel a sense of belonging. And that can be on a whole slew. That could be a community of shoppers. It could be a common cause or some way to facilitate broader connections with the customers that are there. Because there is a very visceral fear that society is sort of unraveling, and I don't actually think that's putting too dramatic a spin on it. And then finally, a steam or accomplishment. Trust is broken, and I think it's really incumbent on the brand. Consumers are looking to the brands, looking to the products that they love to be authoritative strengths and pillars to reestablish trust. And I think for brands, like taking a position that's going to align with your brand, with your category, having an authoritative point of view on a topic that gives people something to rally around, not just as a community, but as a deep infelt desire. So I hope these really, as I said, are just they're just guidelines and thought starters. But these we know that these are important, and we know that they're lacking. So to the degree to which brands and marketers can step in here, I think. So thank you. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Tommy. I appreciate it. So everybody, if you would like to ask a question about that presentation, of course, please use the chat box and pose it to all, or not to all participants, but all panelists, and I'll get to them. So one that came in is, and actually I'll paraphrase it for me. So my wife actually is worried about big box now, grocery shopping.
Yep.
And so she's thinking less about going to Walmart. She's thinking, how can I get everything done in a smaller box because there's fewer people, et cetera. So this was very much focused on big box. Do you have any insights or what's happening on the smaller box and how people are thinking about maybe it's drugstore or even convenience? Frankly, some people, my guess is, are using convenience stores as a grocery store almost just because of fear.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think market data would support that, right? I think convenience store trips are up, and I think it's interesting. Depending on where you are, that answer probably differs. So, there were some places I know in the UK where we spoke to people who are in some of the smaller markets where, the greengrocer is still really heavily frequented. The small store is really it's still there. They're doing all of the other things that everybody else is doing, right? There's 6 feet apart, 2 meters apart. They're controlling the flow into the store, but because it's smaller and because it's more of a community feel, people feel safer there. And really, I think it goes back to the risk that they feel. Those that feel less at risk are much more ready to go and stop off at a high-end market down the street than they would be than others who feel at risk would be. So I think that's true. There is. I guess on the flip of that, some of those smaller stores, particularly in the U.S., have narrower aisles, and this physical space is not as large, and that does cause some concern. We heard that specifically from a number of people saying, "Well, I would prefer to go over there, but the aisles are so narrow, and it makes me feel nervous. It's much better to be in a bigger store because it's always with fewer people. There are fewer people no matter where you go because of the limitations of traffic."
So let me add on to that because I got a question from Kathleen Corcoran, and she says, well, these are great examples, and you kind of touched on it, by the way, just now, Tommy. These are great examples for packaged goods, but think about the retailer. Like, how can the retailer? Of course, it's probably difficult for them to widen their aisles, right?
Right.
Are there things that they said that like a retailer could do to maybe kind of help that people feel more belonging, safer, et cetera? Any ideas?
Yeah, I think the degree to which the retailers can communicate. I mean, I mean, we're saying it amongst our own teams. I think it applies to retailers. Communicate, over communicate. And I think that part of that sense of community and belonging is also understanding um, how do we provide safety for our employees? How are we
Yeah.
protecting the store? How are we partnering with the community? So if you think about that safety, community belonging, and esteem, those are all appropriate levers for retailers as well.
So, and this may be going outside of what you asked, but it's a question I've had, and actually Nancy Hart, she actually is asking the same thing. She says, "Does wearing a mask make you look infected, or make you look like you're trying to protect?" So, is there an avoidance with? Well, I guess there's avoidance with the mask either way. But is there
Yeah.
fear with the mask, or is it like, "Thank you for wearing the mask," or what are you
Well,
sensing?
yeah, I will say I can only speak. I can only hypothesize on that, but I think it's actually both. I think, I mean, especially, so I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. Um, Grocery stores are no longer allowing it. They're no longer admitting people here without masks. You physically can't go in the store without one.
Mm.
So I think in some instances, there's no option. I think without a mask, people are viewed suspiciously because it's a question of why are you not wearing one? But I think that emotionally, and in some instances deep down, especially in the U.S., I think that there is also a fear. We're just simply not used to it. I know other markets have had it for longer, and it's more accepted part of being out, but not so much in the U.S. anymore. And
Excellent.
again, that's just my hypothesis.
Well, I think Jason actually has a hypothesis or an answer. He may actually chime in on the next presentation
Yes.
on this. But hey, thanks a lot, Tommy. I appreciate you coming on and talking about this study.